Alright, y'all, so today I want to make a very quick video to give you my thoughts on Season 6 of Smallville. Just recently finished this season, and like always, I haven't watched anything after the fact. This is just my initial off-the-top thoughts on Season 6 of Smallville. Now, in my last review, I did like Season 5. I thought it was a pretty good season. It felt like the show was finally coming back to more of a traditional Superman superhero show. And I am very glad to report that this season absolutely continues on with that theme. It introduces many new characters that, frankly, are just fantastic in this series. I don't know if it's a massive step up from season 5, because there's some definite criticisms I have with this season. But, it feels more like a step in the right direction. They're getting more to the superhero stuff. In some ways I can see maybe, we're getting closer to the end goal, which of course is Superman. But let's get into it, and let's start out with the positives, and I'll go into my negatives. So the first positive I gotta say is that this season has one of the best episodes of the series, period. Oliver Queen, who, yes, Green Arrow is introduced in this, and there's kind of a running subplot at the beginning of the series, is introduced in Green Arrow, and his costume's fantastic. It looks very comic accurate. They got the actor Justin Hartley, to play him, which was awesome. I was glad he got a chance on Smallville since, he had that failed Aquaman series pilot didn't get picked up. And it's really great. I thought he was a really good Green Arrow. And the fact that they even introduced him, they embraced his comic book origins, and they just kind of ran with it. It was a really interesting subplot. I wouldn't call it a surprise near the beginning of the season that, they find out, oh, Oliver is Green Arrow, too surprising, especially if you know comic books. But it was pretty well done. And there's a standout episode, especially with Oliver and basically what is the Justice League. Now, it's not the Justice League. It's Oliver Queen's little organization. He has gathered up people with abilities, and we get to see all the previous actors. We see Alan Rickman as Aquaman back, Arthur, Victor Stone, Cyborg is back, even the kid who played, they call him Inferno, but come on, bro. That's the Flash, right? That's the Flash. But they brought all these characters back from the previous season, unite them in a pretty kick-ass episode, taking down this, kind of one of the running subplots of this season, that Lex Luthor's building an army of kryptonite-infected super soldiers, and they take down this facility. And frankly, it was a standout episode in the series. It was really good, and I really enjoyed it. And in general, I think, Green Arrow's presence in this series, or this season, was a huge, massive improvement. I feel like, especially with some of the talks he has with Clark about stepping up and becoming more of a hero, you can definitely see in a lot of ways he's kind of a mentor to him. The only thing that really surprised me is that he kind of dips midway through the season and doesn't really come back besides that Justice League episode, which I kind of thought was pretty disappointing. But Green Arrow, all the stuff involved with him was really good. Now, the running subplot, like I mentioned, with Lex building an army of kryptonite-infused super soldiers, I thought was pretty interesting. It felt like something Lex Luthor would absolutely do. I also thought the running subplot that kind of followed up from the last season, where Clark got out of the Phantom Zone, but some Phantoms got out. They either inhibited real bodies, like they came with their bodies. Some of them inhibited other people's bodies. It's a little bit unclear on that part, but the running thing is Clark's got to defeat them, capture them, all that stuff. It was all pretty engaging stuff, and I thought that the fights, especially with the kryptonite, or not the kryptonite, but the Kryptonians that came out of the Phantom Zone that Clark had to fight, were a really good fight and matchup in this season, something we really haven't seen in previous seasons, and it was really good, especially some of the cameos from wrestlers in this season, like the wrestler Kane, and kind of an early appearance from Dave Bautista, who we all know he would play Drax in the MCU. He comes back for an episode to play a Kryptonian, and it's really cool stuff. They also introduce other comic book characters. Martian Manhunter is introduced here. They don't say his name, but it's kind of obvious it's him. They basically say he worked with Jor-El, brought criminals to justice. I'm pretty sure that's Martian Manhunter. Now, I'm not sure, with 100% certainty, but that's pretty much him. The only thing I will say is that I did think his introduction to the season was a little bit clunky. It kind of came out of nowhere, and they could have built it up a little bit more. But regardless, it was pretty cool having him there. Of course, Lionel Luthor being involved in this season, being that emissary for Jor-El. Pretty interesting stuff. And, all this is kind of building up. It's really cool. We also have more, of course, Lana, Clark, and Lex relationship stuff. It wouldn't be a Smallville season without that stuff. But the big thing is that, Lex, and Lana were kind of getting together at the end of season 5, building a relationship, and then they get married about midway to later on in the season. It was a pretty crazy moment, not going to lie. Now, I did kind of figure it wasn't going to last, but, I thought that element of the series was pretty good. It's very much a love triangle between the three of them. I'm not the hugest fan of love triangles personally, but, you got to have those romantic elements to your show to keep other people interested in it. And I just thought it was kind of, it works sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't work. It is kind of hit and miss. I personally don't care for the relationship between Lana and Clark at this point, especially with the constant seasons of will they, won't they, yada, yada. Now, the big thing at the end of the season where Clark finally tells Lana her secret. That's great. But do I think that's going to last? Probably not. Probably not. I will say the ending to the season was pretty good. I did think, though, it was, pun intended, a little bizarre, though, especially with the fact that, the Phantom creates a mirror image somehow of Clark, and he basically becomes Bizarro. That's kind of crazy to me. That's one of the weirdest things that I expected from this. Not saying it's a bad thing, but just kind of a really strange thing. But the fight that they had at the end of the season was pretty good. The whole cliffhanger that Lana exploded in the car. She finally was going to leave the marriage between Lex. And the whole thing with the pregnancy was actually kind of crazy. I'm not sure. I think it's implied that Lex did that. But, wouldn't put it past him. But yeah, Lana's not dead. I know he's not dead. I know she's not dead in the next season. But like I said, pretty crazy stuff. For their positives, I did like the introduction of Jimmy Olsen. Now, I was a bit surprised he was introduced this early on in Superman's life and career, but I guess it makes sense. And it kind of forms a relationship with Chloe, and that was all pretty good and stuff. And I liked Jimmy Olsen, even though I do feel like some of the inconsistencies really start to show up because I believe the actor who plays Jimmy Olsen appeared as a villain from one of the previous seasons of Smallville. So that's oofy. That's not great casting right there. But he does a good job as Jimmy Olsen. And I thought, too, he was a good introduction to this series. Especially the, another highlight episode this series, or this season, is that Noir episode. Really good. I was actually really impressed how well they handled that. For other positives that I can say off the top of my head, like I said, I do like all the I really enjoy the superhero elements. I do like the fact at the end of the season, Clark finally tells Lana his secret. That was pretty good. I don't know if they're going to follow up with that and actually run with it like they did with Chloe, but we will see. But yeah, that's from all the positives that I can think off the top of my head. Now let's get into some of my negatives because, not everything's perfect. Excuse me. I also, actually, before I get into negatives, I almost forgot. Talk about all the acting. The acting's really good. The casting of everyone is pretty good. I thought the actor they got for Jimmy Olsen was good. Of course, I already mentioned the guy they got for Green Arrow is pretty good. All the main cast still do a really good job. And some of the guest stars, I think, do a pretty good job. I almost forgot to mention, they recast Chloe's mother, and she's actually the actress who plays Wonder Woman back in the 1970s, which was a really cool little cameo, and it's always great to see things like that in a superhero show. This visual effects are pretty good, I would say, for the most part, even though there are some really wonky CGI, and I don't know, like I said, it is 2007. I would assume the quality of the CGI would be a little bit better by then, especially since 6 seasons in. But like I said, I'm not like a huge stickler for CGI effects. I think a lot of the battles, like the fight scenes, are really well done. I think by season 6, Smallville is really handled and knows how to do the super-powered, Superman-like fights. And it's really well done. Like I said, I'm not too much of a stickler for CGI effects. But yeah. Now let's get into some of my cons. One of the things that I frankly was very disappointed in was how this season began. Because I'm going to be frank with you. Season 5 had a really interesting cliffhanger. Zod had inhabited Alexa's body. It seemed like the world was going insane and going downhill. This is like a movie scenario. This is really where Clark have a big climactic showdown with Zod. In the first episode, he definitely does. But they just, they wrap it up like Smallville does in one episode. I was extremely disappointed by that. I would have expected that storyline to at least continue for a few episodes. Just because I think Smallville has a really big problem where they create these really engaging cliffhangers. And in the next season, they wrap it all up in one episode, and then they just continue on like normal with their subplots and things happening underneath. I was really disappointed by that. I'm not saying that some of the new elements they introduced weren't great. Green Arrow, great. The Army of Super Soldiers was a pretty good plot, even though I do feel like Lex's turn to such a drastic villainy plan felt a little bit out of nowhere, but also felt natural, especially in his hate towards Clark continuing to grow. It did feel like a natural progression in parts. But like I said, I was really disappointed that they didn't follow up on the Zod stuff, really. They get into a big fight at the beginning of the season, and then Clark just kind of absorbs his essence into a crystal that was given to him by another character. And I was just really, really disappointed by that. Really disappointed. I also think, too, other characters, like, for example, Rhea, she was a character that was introduced when Clark was in the Phantom Zone. She actually does come back in the series, and then she just dies. I was a little bit disappointed. I was hoping she would stick around. I thought that she could be a really interesting character for Clark to bounce off on. But yeah, I just did not like that. I felt like, at least for 5 episodes, they could have continued with that Zod story. They could have made it more epic. And they just wrap it up in one episode. Quite disappointed. And I did think, like I said, some of the other plots in this series was pretty good. I did think some of the elements are kind of clunky, and they're kind of introduced in weird ways. And some characters also just frankly disappear. Green Arrow, there's a subplot with him, and then he just leaves the series. I was quite disappointed by that. I thought he would stick around for the whole series. And, I did feel like there's, for the most part, I think all the episodes in this series are pretty good. And I think that also the idea of giving Chloe kryptonite powers, that was a really cool way. And the way it's revealed at the end of the season was really good. That was another big positive. Gives Chloe something else to do in this series. I was quite surprised that they couldn't figure out something for Martha Kent to stick around, because it sounds like at the end of this season, she's just going to basically kind of leave the show. I was a bit surprised upon that, but I guess, you have too many characters as is. But yeah, I mean, like I said, there's some strong episodes here and there, but there's also some what I call kind of earlier Smallville style episodes. There's an episode called Crimson that has this whole subplot about this woman, with this kind of crazy lipstick, giving other guys love spells. Horrible episode, bro. That's something straight out of season 1, it feels like. Quite awful. So, like I said, there's still some hit and miss episodes, but I think for the most part, overall, the episode quality was still pretty damn good, especially with all the superhero stuff. I just wish that there was other elements to this series that were more gradually built up. I felt like other seasons handled it a little bit better. And I think this, like I said, the gradual introducing and pacing of elements could have been a little bit better in this season. And in general, I do wish other characters like Green Arrow would stick around. In general, I would have let the Justice League to stick around more. But, like I said, one episode, it was fine. It was awesome. But yeah, the choosing of other storylines, I think was a huge mistake, not to kind of run with the Zod stuff more. Maybe they'll save that for another season. I wouldn't be surprised, but massive disappointment. That wasn't followed up on, really. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good season for the most part. I am interested in the future. Bizarro being introduced to the series, quite interesting. I do feel like the show's getting even more comic booky, which is not a bad thing. It's really good. I am very interested to see what happens to the characters like Alana after this. Don't believe for a second she's dead after season 6 if y'all watch it. Other elements I think that are really good. I just think that some other storylines should have been chosen for others. And I think some characters and story elements could have been paced and introduced better. But overall, it's a pretty solid, good season of Smallville. I would say maybe it's slightly better for sure than season 5. Is it the best season of the series yet? I really can't tell you off the top of my head. But I will say it's definitely one of the better seasons for sure. But yeah, my quick thoughts on season 6 of Smallville. Hopefully y'all have a good day. Peace, y'all, and stay tuned for more videos, especially as I keep watching this series, which I plan on doing reviews of each season. Hopefully y'all have a good day, and peace, y'all.